Welcome to my Hemra Story channel. If you like it, you can like it and subscribe. Our story begins. The day I was diagnosed with cancer. James Brown was at the hotel, making out with another woman. You're using cancer as an excuse to force me to come home? I don't have time for, or the inclination to play the patient with you. Let me know when you're actually dying. But then, James Brown ran into me at the hospital while he was taking care of another woman. After seeing the cancer diagnosis, he went crazy. He begged me with a choked voice. Evelyn Smith, I'm not dirty. Don't you ever leave me, okay? Outside the oncology clinic. I open my phone and find James Brown's number. The call history shows that the last time I contacted him was months ago. That day was our second wedding anniversary. I made a big meal. I wanted to ask him when he was coming home, but his assistant answered the phone. Mr. Brown asked me to tell you. He's very busy today and won't be coming home. James Brown was indeed very busy. The only way I could see him was on TV. On the screen, he was in a suit, attending a charity event with the popular young actress Lucy Davis. Lucy Davis was holding his arm. They stood side by side, looking intimate. Off-screen, I was sitting alone in the restaurant. In front of me was the poached fish that James Brown had once loved but which had long since cooled. As I was lost in thought, a female voice came through the receiver. Hello, who is this? It was Lucy Davis. Where is James Brown? Lucy Davis suddenly realized. It's Sister Evelyn Smith. James really is something, not saving your number. Her tone is natural. It's as if she were James Brown's wife. But right now, I don't have time to deal with her provocations. The pain in my body is getting more and more intense, and I can't stop shaking. Put James Brown on the phone. I need to speak to him urgently. Lucy Davis's voice is light and carefree. James is in the bath. He was exhausted last night and will take a long bath. So Evelyn Smith, even if you have an important matter, you will have to wait. Without waiting for me to reply, she continued. This is not my fault. It's James who doesn't know how to restrain himself. He didn't let me sleep much last night, and my back still hurts. In the past 2 years, you and James haven't had sex, have you? Why don't you try an open marriage? It's very popular in our circle. I know a male model. He's fun and won't get bored of you. Shall I introduce you? Lucy Davis kept on talking. I felt like throwing up as I listened to her. I was about to hang up. Suddenly, there was a noise of clothes rubbing on the other end of the line. Then James Brown's voice came on. Yes. My legs felt weak. I could only lean against the wall and crouch on the floor. I'm sick. Can you come to the hospital? James Brown let out a oh. He asked, are you using being sick as an excuse to force me to come home? I hurriedly explained, it's not an excuse. The doctor has looked at my brain CT and needs to speak to a family member. Before I could finish, James Brown coldly interrupted. Evelyn Smith, you know exactly why we got married. I don't have the time or the inclination to play your patient games. At that moment, his voice gradually faded from my ears. Instead, a boyish voice came closer and closer. Evelyn Smith, hold on to me. That was 17-year-old James Brown. He was the one who saw me fall on the playground due to low blood sugar. Even if he was in class, James Brown would rush out of the school building without hesitation. At that time, he pushed his way through the crowd to get to me. He had been fainting since he was a child, but he wiped the blood mixed with sand from my knee with his school uniform. Then he picked me up in his arms and ran to the infirmary. The summer sun in Haichung was scorching. I could clearly see sweat running down the front of his hair and falling into his eyes. Even so, he never stopped for a second. He even comforted me, saying, Evelyn, don't be afraid. I'm here for you. But at that moment, 25-year-old James Brown said, Evelyn Smith, even if you really are sick, it's fine to let me know when you're really dying. In the doctor's office, the doctor looked at me and pushed his glasses up his nose. Miss Smith, the tumor you have is very rare. For your emotional well-being, it would be best if you could ask your parents to come to the hospital. I smiled and said, my parents can't come either. You can talk to me. I can handle it. I glanced at the mirror placed next to the examination table. I saw my bitter smile. Not only could they not come, but they were also probably the people in the world who wanted me to disappear the most. Just a few minutes ago, I received a phone call with the note Anna Lee. As soon as I pressed the answer button, a sentence came out. Evelyn Smith, you have disgraced me. Do you know that the story of James Brown and that actress has spread all over the industry? I told you long ago that the company is in a downturn, and you have to serve James Brown well in order to maintain the cooperation with the Zhou family. You, on the other hand, are always upsetting him so much so that he doesn't even go home. And your stomach is not doing well. If I had known this, why did you have to grab it in the first place? I didn't want to hear her repeat the same old things for the umpteenth time. I interrupted her. Mom, I'm sick. Can you come to the hospital? What's wrong? A tumor. As soon as I finished speaking, my mother burst out laughing. I told you that you would die a horrible death. Look, isn't this retribution? She said, her voice full of glee. As if the person with the tumor was not her own daughter. My thoughts snapped back. I looked sideways at the CT image on the computer. The hand resting on my knee was clenched into a fist, creasing the smooth corner of my shirt. Doctor, I said in a hoarse voice. Am I going to die? Waiting for the bus. I received 2 text messages from unfamiliar numbers. When I opened them, the first thing I saw was an extremely ambiguous photo. At the edge of a messy hotel bed, James Brown is standing sideways, his shirt halfway up. When I zoom in on the picture, I see Lucy Davis's face faintly reflected in the floor-to-ceiling windows. The other message is a text. James says if you want to try an open marriage, he has some good friends he can introduce you to. He also says that since you've known each other for so long, you should try other guys too. Yes. As of today, I've known James Brown for 16 years. But I don't know if it's because of the tumor. I suddenly can't quite remember his face. Or maybe it's because it's been a year since I last saw him. At that time, Lucy Davis was just starting to make a name for herself in show business. Somehow she caught the paparazzi's attention. They set up an early stakeout and took intimate photos of her with James Brown. That night, the search volume for terms related to them suddenly dropped. Hashtag Lucy Davis, Prince Cho, intimate car moment hashtag. Hashtag Lucy Davis, James Brown went to the hotel together. Didn't come out all night hashtag. Hashtag rumor has it that James Brown divorced his wife for Lucy Davis hashtag. I clicked on the photo and kept looking at it. It wasn't until I felt a bloody smell seep into my mouth that I realized I'd bitten my lip. It was the early hours of the morning. James Brown had returned to our home after a long absence. He sat down some distance away from me. Have you been crying? I shook my head and said, it's just an allergy. 10 minutes of conversation made me understand the purpose of his return. So, you need me to appear in public with you to dispel the rumors about Lucy Davis. After a pause, I asked how. The sudden ringing in my ears did not prevent me from hearing the sentence he said. You just need to say that I have no other relationship with Lucy Davis. Say that we are just talking about cooperation. Whether it's in the car or in the hotel, you were there. I asked him why. James Brown lowered his eyes. He took off his wedding ring from his ring finger and played with it in his hands. Lucy Davis is about to star in a new drama. If this kind of scandal breaks out now, it will affect her resources and endorsements in the future. It turned out that he was still the same gentle and attentive James Brown. However, he was no longer interested in me. At that moment, the only thing in the living room that was on was the floor lamp next to James Brown. The light was dim, but it was enough for me to see the indifference and detachment in his eyebrows and eyes. I suddenly remembered when I was 18 years old. To surprise me for my birthday, James Brown secretly rented thousands of drones. The drones were arranged and combined in the night sky of Haicheng to form sentence after sentence of sweet words. Happy birthday. I will always be by your side. I love you, I will be there for you, and I will protect you. Until the day we are old and gray and can no longer walk. Since I was a child, James Brown's father has always taught him to keep a low profile. But because he celebrated my birthday with a high profile, he made the headlines on Haicheng News. In the picture, in addition to James Brown, who was smiling at me stupidly, There was also a drone composed of the last sentence. Evelyn Smith, I must marry you. When James Brown came to see me the next day, his disheveled hair was blown up by the wind, revealing the corners of his eyebrows and a bruise of purple on his forehead. Does it hurt? I asked. He first handed me a bag. Inside was the milk tea I had casually mentioned wanting in the morning. Then he shook his head. No, it doesn't hurt. Whatever you like. I'll do anything. Even if everyone knows. His father has always been willing to be ruthless with him. When I looked up again, I was face to face with a well-dressed James Brown, who had long since lost his boyishness. The long 16 years seemed to have passed in an instant. Later, when I was wheeled into the operating room and waiting for the anesthesia to take effect, I kept thinking, James Brown and I. How did we end up here? At the beginning of the story, James Brown was the apple of his parents' eyes. I, on the other hand, was the real daughter who had just been found by her real parents and taken back from the orphanage to Haicheng. I was 9 years old that year. I was wearing a long-since faded dress and standing in the Smith family's old mansion, which had not yet been destroyed by a fire. The TV reporter, who was carrying a camera, had just left. My father, David Smith, wiped the eye drops from his face and looked disgusted. It was such a big effort, picking up the child and contacting the reporter. The financing must definitely succeed. On the sofa on the other side, my mother, Anna Lee, was hugging a girl about my age. Lily, you're crying and your mother's heart hurts, she said, patting the girl's back and soothing her gently. Mommy is still your mommy. No one can take that away from you, no one can change that. As she said this, she looked at me coldly. There was no joy on her face at having her biological daughter back. Evelyn Smith, for the past 9 years, Lily has been by our side while you were missing. Even now that you're back, I can't do things evenly. In the future, if Lily wants something, you can't compete with her, you have to give in to her on everything. It was only at this point that I learned. I was born not long ago and went missing in the hospital. At that time, the surveillance system was not advanced. The police couldn't find any evidence and could only conclude that an acquaintance had done it. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to take me from Anna Lee's bedside in the hospital ward. Later, to help Anna Lee cope with her postpartum depression, they adopted an orphan girl and named her Lily Smith. Anna Lee didn't see it. Lily Smith, who was sobbing in her arms, was smiling silently, her eyes full of pride. When I was at my most helpless, James Brown took the initiative to hold up my dirty hand. He took me to the bathroom. I saw that every corner of the Smith family was brighter and whiter than my old room in the orphanage. I didn't dare to look up again. It's okay, don't be afraid, James Brown said, pushing some hand sanitizer, lathering it up and then rubbing it onto the back of my hand. If Lily Smith bullies you in the future, I'll protect you. From then on, we grew up together. When I was 10, he chased away the boys who bullied me, but he got a beating from his father. At the age of 13, he took a slap from me from Anna Lee. He also warned Lily Smith not to snitch on me anymore. At the age of 16, he found me in the toilet, locked in by his admirer. When the bucket of sewage fell, he instinctively hugged me close, his palms protecting my hairline. At the age of 19, he found out that someone had sent me love letters. After getting drunk in a bar, he cried, "I've been waiting for you to grow up. I've been waiting for you for 9 years. Don't you like anyone else, okay?" At 21, he was on an internship and his flight was canceled due to heavy rain. He took the 39-hour hard-seat train from the westernmost city to Haicheng, just to tell me in person, "Evelyn, Happy New Year." My friends all said that James Brown and I had been childhood sweethearts. We would definitely be happy together until the end of our lives. First I thought so too. Until the morning of our wedding, James Brown suddenly asked me this question. "Evelyn Smith, why did you agree to marry me?" At that time, James Brown was wearing a suit tailored for the wedding, sitting on the sofa in the room, looking at me through the mirror. His gaze was full of scrutiny. He had never looked at me like that before. He asked again, "Is there any reason other than love?" I didn't understand why, and was about to answer. But then he suddenly threw the vase at hand to the ground. The glass shattered into pieces. He slammed the door and left. As I chased after him, I heard him telling Uncle Brown that he wanted to cancel the wedding. But the guests invited to the scene, except for the reporters, were mostly rich or powerful. This wedding is not just ours. It is also the Smith family and the Brown family. Pop! Uncle Brown slapped him and pointed his cane in the direction where I was. I've always said that someone like Evelyn Smith, who grew up in a welfare home, is not qualified to be my daughter-in-law. You were the one who insisted on marrying her. Now Lily Smith is dead, and you're saying you want to call off the wedding? When we were alone in the hallway, just James Brown and I walked up to him and stood behind him. Then he said something. It made me stop in my tracks, as I was about to check on his injuries. He said, "Evelyn Smith, you really disgust me." It was like waking up from a dream. I stood up and looked at the bus slowly approaching from the intersection. I finally made that decision that had been 2 years late. When I arrived at James Brown's company, it so happened that his assistant, Tom Wong, had just walked out of the office. Seeing me, Tom Wong was a little panicked. "Ma'am, are you here to see Mr. Brown?" He put his hands behind his back and closed the door tightly. He stammered, "Mr. Brown, he's gone to a meeting. Why don't you come back another day?" I shook my head. "No. I'll wait here for him to come back." I took a step forward. Tom Wong quickly raised his arms and put them in front of the door. He looked embarrassed. "Ma'am, it's really not convenient right now." Instantly, some unbearable images flashed through my mind. But no matter how inconvenient it is, I've seen it all before, so it's not that bad. I pushed Tom Wong hard and quickly grabbed the doorknob and pulled it down. The door opened. I walked into the office. Looking around, I saw that the situation inside was not quite what I had expected. James Brown was indeed not there. There was only Lucy Davis, sitting alone on the sofa, drinking tea. "Evelyn Smith, what a coincidence," she said, leaning back. Her fingers, painted bright red, rested on her flat stomach. The corner of her lips curled up slightly. "I have good news for you. I'm pregnant." I was surprisingly calm. I casually asked James Brown's. As soon as the words left my mouth, Lucy Davis's hand, which had been reaching for her teacup, paused. There was a few seconds of silence before she answered, "Yes, it's James Brown's." "Congratulations to you both," I said. Lucy Davis let out a laugh. "If you really want to congratulate us, why don't you initiate the divorce and make our family of 3 complete?" "Evelyn Smith, you must have heard this before. In a relationship, the one who isn't loved is the third party." She stood up and walked towards me step by step. The sound of her high heels on the floor was crisp and clear. She said, "Or we can make a deal. I know that the Smith family doesn't like you because of your sister's death in the fire. You must need money, right? If you agree to divorce, I'll let you set the terms." She was right about one thing. I did need money. I needed to take medicine and have the tumor removed, so that I could have a chance to live. "I agree," I said firmly. At that moment, not far away, the office door was pushed open. James Brown walked in with a cold expression. He glanced at me and said, "What are you doing here?" Suddenly, Lucy Davis fell to the ground and covered her face with her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was full of sobs. "Evelyn Smith, I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have come here to find James. It was my lack of self-awareness. I'll accept the slap you just gave me. But I beg you, don't tell the media. What was happening in front of me was too absurd." I asked James Brown, "Do you believe me when I say I didn't do it?" His actions spoke for him. James Brown brushed past me and stood next to Lucy Davis. He took her arm and lifted her up. It was mid-afternoon. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the warm yellow sunlight enveloped James Brown. It made the wedding ring on his ring finger stand out. How ironic. He and Lucy Davis were obviously in love. His 2 years with her were enough to make up for the 16 years I spent with you. Yet he still wears the wedding ring we exchanged. James Brown, look carefully. I'm the one who slapped you. With that, I raised my hand into the air, and then brought it down, slapping Lucy Davis in the face. But for some reason, the moment the slap sounded, James Brown's originally furrowed brow suddenly unfurrowed, and his eyes lit up. So you came to see me today because you ate. Before he could finish, I held up the divorce agreement in front of him. James Brown, let's get a divorce. He seemed to have not heard me. What did you say? The emotion in his eyes became ambiguous again. I looked straight at him. I repeated every word. I said, I want a divorce from you. James Brown nodded, his gaze falling on the agreement in my hand. He raised his hand to take it, and walked straight to the desk. I thought he was going to sign it. I said, see you at the Civil Affairs Bureau tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. But the next second, the roar of the machine suddenly sounded. James Brown put the agreement into the shredder. It soon turned into a pile of useless confetti and fell into the trash can. James Brown turned his back to me. He whispered, I won't divorce you. I didn't understand why James Brown disagreed. After 2 years of marriage, he had only returned home a handful of times. He obviously no longer loved me, and even hated me. He avoids my calls. He doesn't even care when I tell him I'm sick. I look at his back and ask him why. In the corner of my eye, James Brown turns around and says something with his lips moving, but I can't hear it. It's like I've suddenly been caught in a thick fog. Everything is blurry. In my panic, I lose my footing. Just as I'm about to fall, someone comes up to me quickly and holds me steady. An echoing male voice sounded in my ear. Evelyn Smith, what's wrong? I looked up at the strange man in front of me and tried to break free from his grasp. Who are you? It was like a dream. In the dream, the oncologist pointed to the results of my brain CT. Ms. Smith, you have a pilocytic astrocytoma. The tumor cells are scattered like fog between the brain nerves, especially in the temporal lobe. Therefore, you may experience transient memory loss. The doctor let out a sigh. For a glioma, conservative treatment is not very effective. As for surgery, at that moment, I woke up with a start. It took a few minutes for me to realize that I was lying on my bedroom bed. Suddenly, a hand reached over my shoulder. You've lost weight. James Brown's voice drifted through the silent room. I sniffed. I faintly smelled a familiar perfume in the air. In my 3rd year of university, my mother cut off my allowance because of Lily Smith. I took a part-time job. I did all kinds of dirty, tiring work, and I even delivered takeaways. Then, on James Brown's birthday that year, I used the money I earned to buy him a bottle of Silver Mountain spring water. I never imagined that, for years later, I would smell this fragrance on the day I decided to divorce him. I'll print out another copy of the agreement, and you can sign it as soon as possible. After saying this, I used my arms to support myself as I got up, trying to escape. But before I could react, James Brown had tightened the hand resting on my waist. The other hand was around my legs. Then with a forceful tug, he dragged me in front of him, forcing me to look him in the eye. It was getting dark in the evening. This only made James Brown's eyes shine even brighter. Are you really getting a divorce? He asked hoarsely. I turned my head away. Yes. Even if you ask me 100 times, my answer will always be yes. James Brown looked straight at me, and a dark current rolled in his eyes. Amongst it all, I caught some kind of danger signal. I know all about you and Lucy Davis. If you'll just sign the papers, we can make things right again. The next second, James Brown leaned over and kissed me like he was crazy. At the same time, his right hand dropped and picked up the hem of my shirt. Just as a cool evening breeze blew by, I felt a chill at my waist. Unintelligible words spilled from his mouth. As long as I don't sign, you'll still be my wife. It's about time you fulfilled your duties as a wife. I saw him about to take the next step. I clenched my teeth and bit his lips until they bled. But in the end, it wasn't the pain that stopped him. It was the scar on my lower abdomen that he was covering with the palm of his hand. He slowly looked up. He looked down at me condescendingly and licked the blood from the corner of his lips. Evelyn Smith. Back then in the fire, I risked my life to rush in and save you. And you repay me with a divorce. And you even made up a lame excuse about being sick to get a divorce. The blazing fire that had erupted 5 years ago appeared before my eyes. I spoke coldly, believe it or not. James Brown, I would rather you hadn't come to save me. I would rather die in the fire than marry you. Under James Brown's gaze, I wiped the spot where he had just kissed me back and forth with my sleeve. He swore. With brute force he imprisoned my hands above my head. What do you mean? I raised my eyelids and met his burning gaze. It means I find you dirty. James Brown sneered with a crooked smile. If I'm dirty, aren't you dirty? He pointed his finger at my chest. Your heart is 100 times, 1,000 times dirtier than mine. I refuse to be outdone. Then why are you wasting your time on me? Lucy Davis is pregnant anyway, and as soon as you sign, we'll have nothing more to do with each other. James Brown froze for a few seconds when he heard the word pregnant. You said Lucy Davis is pregnant? Whose child is it? He tried to say something else, but was interrupted by the vibration of his phone. After pressing the answer button, he turned on the speaker and threw the phone aside. Mr. Brown, something's happened. It was his assistant, Tom Wong. Half an hour ago, a paparazzo went live on the internet, saying that someone close to the situation had revealed that Ms. Davis was pregnant. They also said that the father of the child was a certain group boss. Have you found out who posted it? James Brown asked. On the other end of the line, Tom Wong stammered, not yet. But Mr. Brown, the most important thing right now is not those rumors. Ms. Davis. She has a bleeding wrist and has just been taken to the emergency room by her manager. At this moment, James Brown's phone screen lit up again. It was a text message. I glanced at it and saw the words Lucy Davis in the notes. James Brown rolled out of bed without hesitation and walked out of the bedroom. Soon, the sound of the door closing could be heard in the hallway. I was sitting alone on the bed, and the words he said before leaving echoed in my ears. I'm going out for a while. We'll talk about the divorce when I get back. But the night passed. James Brown didn't get in touch, and he never came back. The next day was the day of my follow-up appointment. I knocked on the door of the consultation room. When I walked in, there was only a young doctor sitting there, whom I had never seen before. Hearing a noise, he looked up, momentarily stunned. Who are you looking for? I'm here for a follow-up consultation. He took over my medical record. His gaze swept over the name column, and for a moment, his expression seemed to be in a daze. He muttered, Evelyn Smith. Then he looked at me and said, I'm sorry, the director was called away for a consultation at the last minute. I nodded and was about to sit down and wait, until a pair of sneakers appeared in my line of sight. This is for you. A hand with clearly defined knuckles came in front of me, clenched into a fist. The fingers then spread, revealing a large White Rabbit's milk candy in the center of the palm. I suddenly remembered when I was in the Welfare Institute. Every weekend, the matron would give out a candy. I really liked it, but I didn't want to eat it. So I hid it and didn't tell anyone. Later, a little boy was sent to the Welfare Institute. He had many scabs on his face and arms from previous injuries. In particular, there was a long scar on the back of his neck. He had a sullen personality and always hid in the corner by himself. I asked him his name. He never answered. One day I overheard the teachers talking. The reason he was sent here was because his parents were in a car accident on the way to the amusement park with him. He was the only one who survived. So, the night before I was picked up by my parents and taken home, I gave him all the milk candies I had saved up. At that time he was sitting by the window, arms wrapped around his knees. He looked at the candy and then looked up at me. He said his first words to me, "Thank you." My thoughts returned. I also said to the doctor, "Thank you." The moment our eyes met, he lowered his eyes. He whispered, "My name is John Miller." Half an hour later, I took the escalator down to the first floor and walked through the hospital hall with my head down. I replay the words of the attending physician in my head. "Miss Smith, there is something you must be aware of regarding this tumor. Although I will be operating with a professor from the oncology hospital, due to its rarity and uniqueness, there is no way to estimate the success rate of the operation. Even if it is successful, there is no guarantee of the prognosis or whether there will be any after effects. I am so lost in thought that I accidentally bump into someone. The medical records in my arms scatter like snow. Sorry. I half crouched down and picked up the papers one by one. Without meaning to, I glanced up and saw familiar leather shoes. Then I looked up the long legs. What caught my eye was the hand in front of me, hanging down at the side wearing a wedding ring. And standing behind him was Lucy Davis. Whose medical records are these? James Brown asked. I stood up straight and held the tumor diagnosis in front of him. It clearly said Evelyn Smith in black and white. It must be because the sunlight behind him was blinding, so I misread it. Otherwise, why would he suddenly have red eyes for me? His thin lips parted, and he was about to say something. Suddenly Lucy Davis cried out, "Sister Evelyn Smith, why did you do this?" She covered her bandaged wrist. I apologize to you for what happened that day. Why did you have to tell the media about my pregnancy? After saying that, she pointed at my medical certificate. As a woman, I can understand how you feel. But even if you want to win back your husband, you shouldn't falsify your medical records, should you? Her voice was shrill, and it attracted more and more onlookers. Amidst the murmuring of the crowd, someone pinched the corner of my sleeve and led me behind him. Young lady, adults are legally responsible for what they say. It was John Miller. His voice was firm and clear. The medical record has the personal signature of our head of oncology. If you insist that it is forged, then you can call the police. James Brown's eyes flashed with a sinister light, his gaze cold. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes falling on me past John Miller. He asked with clenched back teeth, "What is your relationship with him?" James Brown, my childhood sweetheart whom I have known for 16 years, and my husband of 2 years. After hearing John Miller's words, what concerned him most was not my condition, but my relationship with John Miller. James Brown paused, then waved his hand again. You don't need to answer. I don't really want to know about your relationship. After saying that, he raised his hand and put it around Lucy Davis's shoulder, raising the corner of his lips to reveal a provocative smile. As I watched their backs as they walked away side by side, I suddenly became curious. If one day James Brown learns of my death, will he regret what he did today? I returned home from the hospital. I quickly packed the last few clothes I wanted to take with me and closed the suitcase. Thunder rumbled outside the window. Big raindrops fell on the window frame one after the other, making a sound that was disconcerting. As far as I knew, James Brown would fly abroad this afternoon to attend a meeting. He wouldn't be back until the day after tomorrow at the earliest. Now was the perfect time for me to move out of here. I walked to the entrance and changed my shoes, but after opening the door, I felt like my whole body was frozen in place, unable to move. A few steps away was James Brown, drenched to the skin. Rainwater kept running down his hair and across his slightly rolling throat. He asked in a deep voice, "You're leaving? Where are you going?" "To see that male doctor." I didn't answer. I just took out a bank card from my bag. "You put this in my hand before we got married. I've never used it. You can check." And the spare key to the apartment, and handed them to James Brown. He didn't seem to want to take them. He just asked, "What do you mean?" I tilted my head and stared at him in silence for a long time. "James Brown, I met you when I was 9 years old and now I'm 25. It can be said that I have spent more than half of my life with you. One late spring we got caught in the rain together. One summer, we walked through the streets and alleys together. One early autumn, we had a first kiss interrupted by thunder. One cold winter, we watched the fireworks that only belonged to Evelyn Smith and James Brown. But what have you done to me?" Memories of the past 2 years came flooding back. It was like a heavy, fluffy cocoon, filling my chest. I took a deep breath. The damp smell of the air hit me. "After the wedding, you had an affair with Lucy Davis. You gave her respect, but made a joke of me. James Brown, you shouldn't have treated me like this. I shouldn't have been treated like this either." I picked up my suitcase and walked quickly towards the door. Behind me, I heard James Brown yell, "Do you know how many women would kill to marry me? Evelyn Smith, if you leave today, you'll never be able to come back to me." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a loud clap of thunder. In the afterglow of the thunder, I heard footsteps getting closer. The next second, James Brown snatched the suitcase away from me. Evelyn, I know I was wrong. He choked up as he spoke again. I know you were really sick and I shouldn't have doubted you. Starting tomorrow, I'll go with you to the hospital for treatment. If High City can't cure us, we'll go to Bayshore or abroad. He held my hand tightly, our fingers interlocked. Wherever we go, I'll be with you. The drizzle suddenly turned into a downpour. The cold wind of early autumn was accompanied by heavy rain as it pelted down on me. I suddenly remembered that year, when there was a fire at the Smith family mansion. It was James Brown who, despite everyone's objections, rushed into the fire to save me. Afterwards, I was lying in the hospital bed, listening to my mother ask, "Why wasn't it you who died? Evelyn Smith, you evil person. Why didn't you die?" Only James Brown kept repeating, as if he had survived the fire, "Thank goodness you're okay." Perhaps it was because I had seen him love me. So he didn't love me anymore, I could realize it. Finally, James Brown realized that I was not joking. He hugged me, his arms tightening, as if he wanted to melt me into his body. "No, I won't let you go. I still have to accompany you in your treatment. When you get better, I want to live with you until I'm 80, with a house full of children and grandchildren. I'll tell you everything you want to know about Lucy Davis. I'll never hide anything from you again." Hearing this name, I clenched my teeth and pushed him away with all my strength. "James Brown, do you love me?" He answered without hesitation. "I love you. I've never loved anyone but you." I laughed at his answer. I lowered my head and took out the photo I had treasured for a long time. A photo of me and him from my wallet. In just a few seconds, the heavy rain soaked the thin photo paper. Under his gaze, I tore the photo into countless pieces. "You're a wall facing south, and I've spent half my life trying to break through. With the other half of my life, I want to live for myself." James Brown seemed to be struck by lightning and froze in place, his eyes gradually dimming. I took off the wedding ring on my ring finger and threw it at his feet. "I don't want this marriage that exists in name only, and neither do you. Whoever wants it, just take it." I moved to a rented apartment that I had found earlier. The neighborhood was close to the hospital, but the security was not very good. The landlord pointed to the apartment next door. Although this household has a male tenant, he works at the hospital. He goes out early in the morning and comes home late at night. It is not uncommon for him to stay at the hospital when he is busy. Upon hearing this, I let my guard down. And indeed, as the landlord said, I hardly saw anyone come back from the next door. As for me, I took my medicine on time and cooperated with the treatment. Life was quite peaceful. Until this morning. Knock, knock. The door was being knocked on, and the sound was deafening. I crept up to the peephole, and there I saw a burly, strange man. "Open the door," he yelled. "Who are you looking for?" I asked, looking around for something to defend myself with. "Just open the door." I quickly picked up my phone and tried to call the police. But just then the knocking stopped. Instead, there was another male voice. "I'm the man of the house, you can tell me what's wrong." I opened the door. I saw John Miller standing there. He tilted his head and smiled. "I'm back late from work, don't be mad at me." Seeing this, the strange man swore. He muttered to himself, "You didn't say there was a man here, this is a real nuisance." Then he smiled at John Miller again. "Sorry, I'm a delivery guy and I took a wrong turn." He quickly turned around and ran down the stairs. I looked at John Miller and was about to speak, but I saw him hold his index finger in front of his lips and give a soft shush sound. Then he raised his voice. "I promise, I will definitely finish work early tomorrow, and come back to cook for you." Until the sound of the man's footsteps appeared outside the apartment building. John Miller let out a sigh of relief. He said softly, "Miss Smith, I live next door to you." Then he took a note from his backpack and wrote something on it with a ballpoint pen. He handed it to me and said, "If you need anything in the future, you can call me first. My phone is on 24/7. I took the piece of paper with his phone number written on it. I watched him turn and walk towards his own door, looking down to find his keys. As he did, a scar like a long scorpion appeared on the back of his neck. Dr. Miller. I called out as the jingling of keys on a keychain echoed through the hallway. Have we met before? John Miller froze. He answered in a muffled voice, no. But you're Scar. My conversation with John Miller was interrupted by the sudden vibration of my phone. It was James Brown's assistant. I thought he was going to tell me that James Brown had signed the agreement. But instead he said, Mrs. Smith, Mr. Brown has been in a car accident. Can you come to the hospital? Evelyn Smith, James Brown. 1 month later. James Brown's broken leg from the car accident has almost recovered, and he is ready to be discharged from the hospital. When he gets up, his assistant Tom Wong warns Mr. Brown, be careful. What is there to be careful of? James Brown thinks to himself. The car accident was not serious. What's more, he deliberately crashed into a tree in the countryside, just to soften Evelyn Smith's heart and make her change her mind. James Brown was listening in the night Tom Wong called her. Her soft voice came through the receiver. At that moment, James Brown felt an inexplicable heart palpitation. He had an accident? Evelyn Smith asked. Tom Wong looked at James Brown's eyes and said, yes, it was a serious one. His whole leg was broken, and he was screaming your name even though the pain was so great that he almost fainted. Please come and see Mr. Brown, okay? There was no sound on the other end of the line. After a long while, Evelyn Smith answered, I understand. But the next day, the third day, and even the day James Brown was about to be discharged from the hospital, Evelyn Smith never came to the hospital. During this period, James Brown tried to call Evelyn Smith again, citing the divorce agreement. But the next second, he heard a mechanical female voice. The number you have dialed is not in service. Evelyn Smith had not only moved away, but also canceled her number. Finally, James Brown clearly realized that he was really going to lose her. Instinctively, he lifted the covers and dragged his casted leg to go find her. When he opened the door, a few burly bodyguards stopped him. The chairman said, you can't go anywhere. He thought. James Brown sat in the car and picked up his phone. He carefully entered the new number of Evelyn Smith that Tom Wong had just looked up. She didn't answer. James Brown dialed a second and then a third number, just like the old Evelyn Smith. In the last few seconds of the ringtone, the phone connected. Evelyn, it's me. James Brown couldn't wait to ask, are you at the hospital? I'll come and see you now. Are you feeling better? Have you had any headaches lately? Why don't I go with you to the hospital in Bayshore? And you've always wanted to go to Yonggagong Temple, haven't you? I'll go with you. Evelyn, if you don't say anything, I'll take that as a yes. Almost at the same time, an unfamiliar male voice sounded in James Brown's ear. She can't come. After a short pause, James Brown remembered that this man was Dr. Miller. Put Evelyn Smith on the phone. I need to speak to her urgently. As soon as the words left his mouth, John Miller whispered, she can't answer the phone either. She passed away the day before yesterday. In the cafe. John Miller sat opposite James Brown and took something out of his pocket. I asked you to meet me because Evelyn Smith wanted me to give you this back. He then pushed the red velvet jewelry box towards James Brown. James Brown knew what was inside without opening it. It was the ring with which he had proposed to Evelyn Smith when he was 23 years old. When he was at university, he studied jewelry design. He spent more than half a year drawing the rough draft and then handmade it. A piece of pigeon's blood red was in the middle, surrounded by dozens of diamonds in a circle. 2 years later, it is still dazzling and dazzling. But its owner is no longer with us. James Brown holds the jewelry box in his hands. He is gripping it so hard that the edges seem to be embedded in his palm. Evelyn Smith. How did she die? John Miller raises his glass to his lips and takes a sip of his iced Americano. Do you know what kind of tumor she had? Without waiting for James Brown to answer, he continues, it was a pleomorphic sarcoma. This kind of tumor has a low success rate even with surgery. She was lucky the surgery was successful, but there was a pause and John Miller lowered his eyes. After the operation, she had after effects. Did her parents know she had died? James Brown asked. John Miller shook his head. Before her surgery, I accompanied her to the Public Security Bureau once. What did you go to the Public Security Bureau for? to move her household registration. John Miller set the glass down with a crisp sound. She was removed from the Smith family register, so the hospital didn't notify anyone else of her situation. The thought of Evelyn Smith going into the operating room alone and suffering the aftereffects alone. James Brown felt as if a giant hand was squeezing his heart, making his breathing short and strong. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Did she leave any words before she left?" John Miller looked up at him. He said word by word, "No. She didn't leave any words for anyone." After saying that, John Miller saw no reason to stay any longer. As he got up to leave, James Brown suddenly asked him, "Do you like Evelyn Smith?" Without hesitation, John Miller answered, "Yes. I like Evelyn Smith. I liked her when we were in the orphanage. If her parents hadn't picked her up that year, maybe I would have grown up with her, not you." Later, John Miller was also adopted, and his adoptive parents were a doctor and his wife. He never thought he would meet Evelyn Smith again in his life, until the day when a colleague asked him to cover for him. When he looked up again, he saw Evelyn Smith again after 16 years. But it was because she had a tumor. John Miller looked down on James Brown with a mocking gaze. "You married her and didn't cherish her. You knew she was sick but still fooled around with other women. James Brown, you really aren't a man." After John Miller left, James Brown sat in the cafe for a long time. He suddenly remembered the conversation he had with Evelyn Smith's mother 2 years ago. It was also in a cafe like this one. Anna Lee said, "You can't marry Evelyn Smith." James Brown froze for a moment and asked why. Although he always knew that Anna Lee didn't like Evelyn Smith and preferred Lily Smith, the adopted daughter. He never imagined that Anna Lee would say this so bluntly. Anna Lee only asked in return, "James, do you remember the fire?" James Brown will never forget that fire. It was a sweltering July day. The sun baked the flowers and plants outside the window, and even the air seemed to have congealed. James Brown was sitting under the air conditioning playing a video game. Without thinking, he turned his head and saw the Smith family mansion on the second floor glowing with fire. He left the game console and rushed out of the house. He managed to save Evelyn Smith just in the nick of time, but she had already passed out from the smoke. So she was unable to tell James Brown that Lily Smith was still trapped on the second floor. Then 119 arrived and put out the fire. They found Lily Smith, who was no longer breathing. Out of the blue, Anna Lee sneered, "You've been tricked by Evelyn Smith." She tapped her finger on the screen. Then she put the phone in front of James Brown. This is the security footage from the second floor of the old mansion before the fire broke out. At the 5th second, Evelyn Smith leaves the room. At the 6th second, Lily Smith also runs out of the room. At the same time, Evelyn Smith stops in front of the stairs. At the 10th second, they seem to be arguing. James Brown can see the anger on Evelyn Smith's face. At the 13th second, Evelyn Smith pushes Lily Smith and turns to go downstairs. Lily Smith fell to the ground and did not get up. In the 14th second, there was a faint flash of light from Lily Smith's room. It then spread quickly along the carpet on the second floor. The video ends here. Anna Lee spoke slowly. "That day was Lily's birthday. If I remember correctly, you gave her a doll." Evelyn Smith was taken away from her parents at a young age and grew up in a welfare institution. She is very good at pretending. She looks harmless on the surface, but in fact she is very possessive. After learning that you had given Lily a present, she set fire to Lily's room and deliberately pushed Lily over. And finally, when you arrived, she pretended to be the victim. Now Evelyn Smith is gone. James Brown will never know for sure. Although he did give Lily Smith a doll. But in fact, this was not the root cause of the fire at the old house. The memory goes back. The day of the fire was the middle of summer vacation. As usual, Evelyn Smith got up early to go to the library. Anna Lee was sitting on the sofa reading a magazine. She sneered. "Who are you trying to impress? You're going to marry into the Smith family business anyway. Why don't you learn how to be a good wife and mother while you can, so you can contribute to the family?" Evelyn Smith ignored her and grabbed a piece of bread before closing the door. Halfway through a technical book, Evelyn Smith receives a call from Lily Smith. She doesn't want to answer and hangs up straight away. Ever since they were little, Lily Smith has never stopped telling Annalee about Evelyn Smith's faults. The first time she calls her, it can only mean bad news. But Lily Smith won't stop calling. Just as she is about to turn off her phone, she suddenly receives a text message from Lily Smith. I was sketching in the abandoned park and fell accidentally. My leg seems to be broken. Can you come and pick me up? Evelyn Smith's thumb paused at the top of the screen. At this time the interface popped up a few more lines. Sister. For the sake of our family, please come and pick me up. I'm sorry for what happened in the past. I will never bully you again, please. Evelyn Smith sighed, lifted her hand and put the book into her bag. In the past, no matter how Lily Smith had overreacted, she would just think of it as a trivial matter. She never imagined that one day her sister, who had grown up together, would actually do something to hurt her. So when she arrived at the park, she didn't see a soul. She called Lily Smith. When she heard the message, the subscriber you have called is switched off. A punk with dyed yellow hair and arm tattoos was closing in on her. Evelyn Smith looked at him warily and backed away a little. What do you want? Until she was up against the wall and couldn't retreat any further. Meanwhile, at the old Smith family mansion, Lily Smith was lying on her bed in her room, humming a tune. She stared at her phone, transfixed. She was waiting for the man with the wandering eye to send her a photo. Evelyn Smith, that nuisance, was finally going to get dirty. She wondered how she would compete with her for James Brown in the future. But in the end, she waited for Evelyn Smith to push open the door and slap her hard in the face. She had never suffered such humiliation in the Smith family, and she was about to scold her. But then she saw Evelyn Smith find a recording and click to play it. No, don't call the police, I'll talk. It was that Lily Smith who told me to do it. She said she'd pay me if I took pictures of you being humiliated. What Lily Smith didn't realize was that Evelyn Smith had taught herself self-defense in order to protect herself. What can you do with a recording? Lily Smith sneered. Even if you really were bullied today, my mother wouldn't blame me. Because she owes me. Looking at Evelyn Smith's departing back, a horrible but distinct thought suddenly occurred to her. What if Evelyn Smith disappeared completely? The next second, she ran out of the room. She shouted deliberately, You are a jinx who was abandoned in an orphanage. Even your own parents don't like you. You are really pathetic. Evelyn Smith was infuriated and pushed her. Unexpectedly, Lily Smith slipped and fell backwards. Her head hit the floor so hard that she fainted. Meanwhile, the curtains she had lit before leaving her room caught fire. The flames quickly spread across the second floor, burning the carpet and wooden cupboards. Evelyn Smith, who was downstairs on the first floor, smelled the burning. She turned around and tried to run upstairs to bring Lily Smith down, but the fire was too strong. When she woke up, the first thing she did was attend Lily Smith's funeral. She also had to endure her father David Smith's abuse and her mother Annalee's curses. Evelyn Smith, may you die a horrible death. You jinx, it was you who started the fire and killed Lily. Why wasn't it you who died? At that time, neither James Brown nor Evelyn Smith could have imagined that Lily Smith's death would become the seed of a rift between them. James Brown did many ridiculous things to marry Evelyn Smith. He always happened to be sick on the day when Mr. Joe arranged a blind date. When he couldn't get out of it, he deliberately spoiled the meeting. There was nothing he could do, so Mr. Joe had to agree. People said that the groom could not meet the bride before the wedding. But James Brown couldn't help it. He wanted to see what Evelyn Smith looked like in a wedding dress. As soon as he walked to the door of the hotel room, he heard Annalee say, You know damn well why you like James Brown. He slowly loosened the door handle. He wanted to stand on the sidelines and hear Evelyn Smith's feelings for him. But all he heard was Evelyn Smith's words, Yes, I did it to provoke Lily Smith. Her tone was flat, as if she didn't feel any emotions. When I was young, I deliberately got close to him. When I grew up, I fell in love with him and accepted his proposal, all to win over Lily Smith. As soon as she finished speaking, James Brown turned around and left. So much so that he didn't hear the rest of her words. Are you satisfied with what I said? In the room, Evelyn Smith walked towards Anna Lee. Do you think I don't know why I was taken away from my parents when I was born and ended up in the orphanage? Not only do I know this, I also know the real identity of Lily Smith. Anna Lee stammered, what do you mean? Evelyn Smith laughed. I must say, Lily Smith really looks like your first love. The first love who was killed by David Smith and left in pieces. Evelyn Smith opened the door. Looking at Anna Lee, she made a pleased gesture. You don't want me to marry James Brown, but I'm going to grow old with him. Now please leave. Anna Lee laughed angrily. You look just like David Smith. A disgusting, hateful face. This conversation was like a rainstorm. It watered the seed that had been planted when Lily Smith died, causing it to sprout quickly. It eventually became a towering tree growing deep in James Brown's heart. The more it flourished, the less he could see his own heart. He came back to his senses. James Brown raised his hand and called for his assistant. Stop all cooperation with the Smith family and withdraw the investment. He wanted David Smith to beg him, and he had to kneel. In Haicheng, the Brown Corporation is a giant in the jewelry industry. Seeing this, other companies also followed suit and ended their cooperation with the Smith family. Finally, a month later, the Smith family's financial chain broke, and they declared bankruptcy. David Smith had black eyes and was kneeling in front of James Brown, begging him to spare them. Okay, but I have a condition. James Brown shook the glass containing the whiskey. Let Anna Lee apologize in person to Evelyn Smith's photo. Even after falling from the upper echelons of society overnight, Anna Lee still managed to maintain an elegant posture. She asked with a stiff neck, why should I apologize to her? James Brown sat on the sofa with his legs crossed. He casually threw a few photos at Anna Lee's feet. Just one glance made her lips purse and her expression flustered. The photo was of a man. The man she had paid to cause trouble for Evelyn Smith that night. But James Brown had already expected her to put up a fight. It didn't matter because he had other plans anyway. James Brown dialed the police in front of Anna Lee. She could no longer maintain her composure and began to swear. She accused James Brown of breaking his promise to let the Smith family off the hook. James Brown laughed. I only promised David Smith that I would not withdraw my investment, he said. But I never said I wouldn't tell the police about what David Smith did. That night, David Smith was arrested and imprisoned. The charge was illegal business practices. Anna Lee went mad as her assets were frozen, and her mansion was put up for auction. That was the price she paid for betraying her first love and marrying David Smith. Now she had nothing. Out of respect for Evelyn Smith, James Brown had Anna Lee committed to a psychiatric hospital. The patients in the same ward could see this every day. Anna Lee murmuring someone's name to a crumpled diagnosis of cancer. On the day the Smith Family Group building was completely sealed off, someone asked James Brown to meet. After hanging up the phone, a Twitter feed popped up on the screen. Shock! Popular young actress Lucy Davis has been accused of blackmail. When James Brown arrived, the once sought-after actress was sitting in the corner of an old and run-down restaurant. Lucy Davis poured a glass of wine for James Brown. She then remembered that he was a celebrity and she was just an ordinary person, so she poured him a watered-down glass of wine. She raised the glass to her lips, tilted her head back and gulped it down. I'm sorry to have embarrassed you, Master Zhou, James Brown said, standing at the table and looking at her. Lucy Davis looked up at him. I want to say that I agree to your proposal. The day James Brown decided to strike against the Smith family, he did something else. He sent the recording of Lucy Davis demanding a few $1 million in hush money to the media. At the same time, he informed Lucy Davis that, as long as she kept quiet and disappeared, he would not call the police. James Brown is a businessman. Pinpointing the crux of the problem and the opponent's weak points is what he has been doing year after year. He knows exactly how much Lucy Davis has paid to get to where she is today. As the two of them silently stared at each other, outside the restaurant, a little girl selling flowers passes by. Clang! Lucy Davis stands up, goes over to the girl, and buys all the roses in her basket. I didn't know you had a kind heart, James Brown scoffs. Lucy Davis looks down at the roses and shakes her head. It's not kindness. I'm not a kind person either. I'm just trying to save the 15-year-old me. Save the me named Li Xiaodi. 25. Lucy Davis's real name is Li Xiaodi. She was born in a remote mountainous area. An accident left her father, Li Chong, unable to work. Her mother left home, leaving her with her younger brother. Since then, the family has lived on the village's subsidies. She took care of her younger brother, cooked the meals and did the housework. As for studying, she was forced to drop out of school by her father during her first year of high school. Li Chong said that the only tuition fees should be reserved for her younger brother, because only her younger brother could bring honor to the family. One day when she went to buy alcohol for Li Chong, she was attracted to the attention of the female celebrity on TV. That woman was so beautiful, more beautiful than the roses she grew. The center of attention, radiant with light. The woman running the kiosk teased her as she took her money, saying, "This girl from the Li family is so pretty. Maybe she'll become a big star too." Whether she could become a big star, she didn't know. She just knew that she had to hurry back to pick the roses and take them to the city to sell, so she could buy her father some wine and her brother some candy. However, while she was selling flowers, she happened to meet two people of a similar age to herself. They were wearing clean high school uniforms. The boy bought a cup of milk tea, stuck the straw in it, and handed it to the girl. He said, "Your sister has gone too far. How could she throw away your homework? Just you wait, I'll go and scold her for you." As she watched the two of them leave, she let go of the hand holding the roses and drifted off. If only someone could protect her like that, she thought. When she was 18 years old, Li Chong introduced her to a man. She had never seen the man's face. She only heard that he was in his second marriage, that his family owned land and cows, and that the dowry he gave would be enough to send her younger brother to high school. She refused. At dinner, her younger brother ate the food she had cooked and sneered. "I told you it was enough. What are you picking on someone with such good conditions? If you keep putting it off, you won't even be able to find someone for a second marriage. You'll have to settle for a widow." She didn't argue back. She didn't want to get beaten up again because of her brother. But she still felt aggrieved. Why was it that her brother could go to high school and then university, and she had to hastily find a man to marry? In the future she would have children, and she would trap them here in the mountains just like her. Later, the heavens favored her. A film crew came to shoot in the village because they liked the natural scenery. She was chosen by the director to be an extra because of her natural beauty. But Li Chong disagreed. In his eyes, acting and singing were all frivolous. She tried to persuade him, saying, "You can make a lot of money acting in TV dramas. Once I've earned money, my brother will have money to pay for school fees, and he'll have money to marry a daughter-in-law and buy a house in the future." Li Chong immediately agreed. He also reminded her, "If you meet a rich idiot, don't be a hypocrite. Remember, your brother is still waiting for you to support him." She smiled and agreed. But in her heart she thought, "Once I'm out, I'll never come back. I'll climb my way to the top until everyone is looking at me." To achieve this goal, the first thing she did was change her name. The moment she received her new ID card, she completely changed from Li Xiaodi to Lucy Davis. 26. Later she met James Brown. She knew what she wanted and what James Brown could give her. So, at the wrap party, she chased the drunken James Brown to the parking lot, opened the back door and sat next to him. "Who are you?" James Brown looked at Lucy Davis with eyes red from alcohol. Lucy Davis smiled and said, "Mr. Zhou, everyone in the industry says that you and your new wife are not getting along. But it doesn't seem that way to me." She nodded her head at the ring on James Brown's ring finger. "If you really have no feelings for her, will you keep wearing it?" James Brown raised an eyebrow. So I can be your tool. In exchange, you can give me the supporting actress role in the new drama that Zhou's company is investing in," said Lucy Davis. It was a childish proposal, but James Brown agreed. After a few dramas, Lucy Davis naturally got an advertising job. The commercial was also shown in the small shop in her hometown. Li Chong was very proud. "See? This is my daughter. She really brings honor to the Lee family. Seeing his face, Lucy Davis felt extremely ironic. She was so disgusted that she vomited her breakfast. After spending a long time in the entertainment industry, Lucy Davis's ambitions grew bigger and bigger. So big that she no longer just wants to be the leading lady on screen. She also wants James Brown. Completely and utterly. Right now, Lucy Davis picks up the plane ticket. She looks at James Brown, still smiling gently. But she says, "James Brown, do you know what your retribution is? It is that you will remember Evelyn Smith for the rest of your life, what you did to her, and your guilt. Until you die." And to get back at him, Lucy Davis deliberately didn't say that. She had actually met Evelyn Smith just a few days ago. Extra. My name is Mia Smith. I'm 8 years old. I'm Evelyn Smith's daughter. Don't get me wrong. I'm not my mother's biological daughter. I'm an orphan she adopted from the Welfare Institute. Back then, she walked into the Welfare Institute wearing a long dark blue dress. Among the dozens of children, she saw me sitting in the corner at a glance. After the adoption formalities were completed, she took me home. It was a small house next to a girls' school. I learned that my mother came here to teach. She named me Mia Smith because she said, "Women are born of heaven and earth and continue forever." The second year my mother came to the mountains, one of her good friends came here to find her. She told me to say hello to Mr. Miller. I was confused and followed them, waiting in the water. I heard Mr. Miller say that he wanted to stay too. Since then, he has lived in the house next to mine. My mother teaches and he treats people. But Mr. Miller is strange. He always keeps his distance from my mother. But when my mother needs help, he is the first to rush to her side. Everyone in the village says that he likes my mother. I don't understand what it means to like someone. I just know that my mother's smile is even brighter than before. Later, there was a news report about the day the private jet of a group chairman crashed. My mother was worried about how to persuade the old man of the Zhang family to let his granddaughter continue going to school. When the picture of the deceased chairman appeared on the screen, my mother glanced at it. Then she turned to Mr. Miller and said, "No, I still have to go and talk to him. How can a girl not go to school?" Mr. Miller looked at the photo and froze. Then he smiled and put down his chopsticks. "Okay, I'll go with you." You see, my mother was always so busy. Men and love only occupy a small part of her life. What is important to her is how to teach girls in the mountains to face menstruation, know their bodies, and use sanitary napkins correctly, and how to persuade more parents to send their girls to school. Perhaps this is just how women are. They may be temporarily distracted by certain people and things, but they will never stop moving forward. One day I want to become a woman like her.